Hello, my name is Elliot Veloso, and I'm the Interim Director of Elections for the City of Lowell, Massachusetts. This video has been prepared to provide a virtual training session for those poll workers who would prefer not to appear at the in-person training sessions we're offering for poll workers at Lowell City Hall for the September 1st state primary. This training session hews very closely to our in-person training session and is accessible from the City of Lowell's website. So if you go to the City of Lowell's website, lowellma.gov, and then scroll down to the top menu, you will find the Elections and Census Department. Click on that link and it'll take you to the Election and Census homepage. If you look in the left-hand corner of that webpage, you're going to find a link that says Poll Worker Training Materials. So if you click that link, it'll send you to the Poll Worker Training site, where there will be a link where you can access this video from the city's YouTube account. Additionally, you will also find available for download the training materials, handouts that we provide to our poll workers who appear at the in-person training session. Here are copies of the training materials we provide our inspectors and our clerks and wardens. Additionally, you'll be able to download the PowerPoint presentation that I use for this training, particularly the in-person training. Additionally, for those poll workers that are doing their training virtually, you're also going to find a questionnaire. Usually, when we do these training sessions in person, we have poll workers check in before they attend. Usually they write their name on a check-in list. This allows us to have a record showing that the poll worker participated in the training session and thus allows them to be paid for attending the training session. We pay $20 for poll workers who attend the training session. For those poll workers that are participating in this training session virtually, we're going to have available a questionnaire for download at the city's website. So poll workers doing this training virtually will need to download this questionnaire and answer a few questions. These questions, in order to answer these questions, you'll be required to watch this video in full. And then the poll worker, once they finish answering these questions, will sign and date this questionnaire and return it back to City Hall, either by mailing it, hand delivering it, inserting it in the city's lockbox, which is located at the basement entrance of Lowell City Hall, adjacent to the JFK Plaza. Once the elections office has your questionnaire with your signature and date, that will provide us the documentary proof necessary so that we can prove that you participated in our training for the state primary, and we'll ensure that you get paid. So, without further ado, I'm going to begin the training session like I would for an in-person training session. So, generally the way our training session goes is at the beginning I'm going to introduce our poll workers as to an overview of what their duties will be on election day. We'll go over how the polls open, and we'll also discuss how the equipment and the polling location is set up before the opening of polls. We'll then go over generally how voters will typically vote during the election, some situations that may change, and some circumstances you'll likely run into during the election day. And then we'll conclude with closeout procedures, how to close out the polls at the end of the election, how to sort and secure the ballots for transport back to Lowell City Hall, and generally how to close up your polling location at the end of the night. So, the first thing we'll discuss is the general duties of the poll workers who are going to be assigned to each ward and precinct on election day. Typically, there are three types of poll workers that work the polls on election day: wardens, clerks, and inspectors. And we're going to go over their general duties one at a time. Wardens are the chief election officer at a polling location. The warden generally supervises the activity that goes on at a precinct and makes sure that the polls are ready to open prior to the polls opening. They supervise all the other poll workers throughout the day, and they take the lead in closing out the polling location at the end of the night. The warden is responsible for maintaining order at the polling location and handling issues and violations that may come up at the polling location throughout the day. The warden can call upon police assistance if necessary. Each polling location has a police officer assigned to them throughout the day. If a warden leaves, the warden shall assign a deputy to be in charge of the polling location while they're away. Typically, this is the clerk, and we'll get to the clerk's duties shortly. The warden also serves as the point of contact between the polling location and Lowell City Hall. So if an issue comes up that requires the precinct to call Lowell City Hall, we ask that the warden be the one who makes that phone call. The reason we ask that is on election day, City Hall often receives a lot of calls from various voters and other people in City Hall. In order to cut through those calls, when the warden calls, we here at City Hall will know to prioritize that call because the warden is likely calling because an issue has come up at the polling location. So again, we ask that if an issue comes up at the polling location that requires the precinct to call Lowell City Hall, we ask that the warden be the one to do it. Additionally, the warden is also generally in charge of supervising the poll workers, and along with the clerk, they're in charge with documenting the payroll for the day and at the end of the night. So now we go on to the clerk. The clerk serves as the second in command of the polling location. The clerk assists the wardens in all the duties that need to be done at the polling location throughout the day. The clerk's primary duty is to be in charge of record keeping during the election. Each poll worker kit, and we provide a kit of supplies and materials to each precinct, will include this green binder. This green binder contains most, if not all, of the documentation that a clerk will need to fill out with the warden throughout the election day. And one of the primary documents here in the green binder is a clerk's report. So I pulled out an example of a clerk's report we've used in previous elections, just so you could take a look at it. It looks something like this. What the clerk's report is that it allows a clerk to document everything that goes on an election day throughout the day. So, and if you look at the pages of the clerk's report, and we'll make sure to include a copy of the clerk's report in the materials that, training materials that you can download on the city's website for those clerks that want to look at what the clerk's report looks like and the information they'll be filling out. It sort of hews pretty closely as to what happens throughout the day. So for instance, if we look at the first page of the clerk's report, you'll notice that this is regarding the opening of the polls. So some of the information it'll ask is the time that the polls open. Polls open at 7 o'clock in the morning, so the clerk is going to have to note that there. Who declares the polls open, so you'll put the name of the warden here. Your opening counts. This makes sure that the warden and the clerk checked the ballot box, making sure that it was empty. It has a tally so that the clerk can check the ballot machine throughout the day and see the number of ballots that are being processed. And there are other sections that the clerk will fill out throughout the day. For instance, on this page, this deals with absentee ballots, the number of absentee ballots that are delivered and processed throughout the day. There are other sections regarding challenge voters, provisional ballots, checking in on voter equipment. We have a section here regarding a log of unusual happenings that occur at your polling location. One of the clerks and wardens' responsibilities is that if something unusual happens at your polling location, let's say someone falls and breaks their leg or something like that happens, the warden and clerk should note it down, just so that there's a record of what happened in the clerk's report. Additionally, at the end of the night, the clerk will document the closing of the polls, right here in this section. So such as the time the polls close, the fact that the warden declares them. And then the clerk will also assist the warden in the closing of the counts. So counting ballots, sorting them, getting them ready for storage. So again, the clerk is essentially the chief record keeper of the election. And he or she will work in conjunction with the warden to get all this documentation together. As I said, the clerk is often the second in command of the polling location, so if the warden has to leave, often the clerk will be assigned as the deputy in charge. The clerk, again, will assist the warden and may also call City Hall on behalf of the warden if the warden is busy with other things. Finally, we have the inspectors. The inspectors I sort of refer to as sort of the front line of poll workers when they deal with voters. They're often the first point of contact between the voter and the polling location. And the reason for that is because the inspector's primary duty is to be in charge of the check-in books. So here's an example of a check-in book. The way it works, and we'll get into this further on in the training, but just so those who are inspectors and may be new to this understand, in order for a voter to vote in person at a polling location, they need to check in with the check-in table at the polling location first. And the reason for that is in these check-in books are listed all the registered voters for the ward and precinct that you may be assigned to, as well as the addresses of these voters. So the voter, before they can vote, has to go to the check-in table and provide their name and the address where they're registered to vote. The inspectors will then look through these check-in books, and they'll find that voter and check them in before the voter receives a ballot. And we'll go into how inspectors will check in these voters later on in the training. Inspectors will also be assigned duties by the warden and clerk throughout the day. So inspectors will assist in the setting up of the polling location before the polls open. They'll assist with processing ballots throughout the day. And they will assist the warden and clerk in closing out the polling location and counting, sorting, and securing the ballots for transport back to Lowell City Hall. Now, wardens, clerks, and inspectors may also be translators. Certain poll workers, when they submitted their application, indicated that they may have language skills, either Spanish or Khmer translation skills or French or any other language. If you are a translator, we have provided buttons in the kits that we're providing to our wards and precinct that indicate that you are a translator. So in this kit, we've got a Spanish translator button and a Khmer translator button. So if you are a translator and you've indicated as such in your application, we ask that you wear those buttons so that voters that come to the polling location can see the button and ask for assistance should they need it. Now, when it comes to assisting a voter with the voting process, what I like to say is that poll workers can assist with the how of voting. What they cannot assist is with the who of voting. And what I mean by that is poll workers can assist voters with the process of voting if they have questions. So for instance, you could have a voter come up to you and say, "Hi, I'm newly registered to vote. This is my first time doing it. How do I mark the ballot?" Or "How do I check in?" Or "How do I deposit my ballot?" When it comes to the process of voting, poll workers can assist those voters with the process of voting, how to vote. You can explain how you mark the ballot. You can explain who the candidates are for each race. You can explain where they can vote, how they can deposit their ballot, things like that. But if a voter comes up to a poll worker and says, "I wasn't really paying attention to this election. Who should I vote for?" Poll workers cannot assist voters by telling them who or whom they should vote for. If someone asks you that question, a poll worker must say, "I'm sorry, I can't tell you who you should vote for. I can only assist you with how you can vote. Who you should vote for is up to you and your conscience." So again, as poll workers, we cannot assist people by telling them who they should vote for. All we can assist with is the process of voting, how to vote. So, having gone over the general duties of poll workers, we're now going to go to the opening of the polls. If you are an election worker, you should arrive at your polling location at 6 o'clock, 6:30 at the latest. The reason for that is that the polls have to be open at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they close at 8 o'clock at night. When the polls open at 7 o'clock, they must be ready for voters to vote. What that means is that your voting machines have to be ready to take in ballots. Your zero tapes must be printed and posted. Your poll booths have to be set up. Usually prior to election day, we have poll booths set up by DPW and school department, but poll workers have to double check and make sure that the booths are ready. You should have any instruction cards or specimen ballots posted on the walls. They'll be in your poll worker kits. But any of those materials, like the Voter Bill of Rights or any sort of ward and precinct listings, anything that requires it to be posted on the walls, you need to ensure that those things are up prior to the opening of the polls. Additionally, all of your voting machines and auto marks have to be set up. And we're going to go over the voting machines and how to set them up shortly. And finally, your check-in and check-out tables need to be ready. And by that I mean that your books are all set, your inspectors are sitting down, and you're ready to start taking in voters. Wardens, if a poll worker doesn't show up, we ask that you call no-show prior to calling the election office at around 7:30. The reason we ask that you wait until 7:30 is that usually in the mornings we're dealing with troubleshooting and various issues that may come up as the polls are opening. So additionally, you may run into a situation where a poll worker either ran into an emergency or is somewhat late getting there. So again, we ask that you don't call a no-show until 7:30. If you do call a no-show at 7:30, we will look to try to get another poll worker at your location to replace it. But again, all poll workers should arrive at the polling location at 6 o'clock, 6:30 at the latest to assist with setup. All poll workers have an hour for lunch and an hour for dinner. The city will not be providing food, so please plan accordingly. I like to bring peanut butter and jelly, but you can go out for lunch if you wish. Just remember that you need to schedule your lunch and dinner breaks ahead of time with your warden. The reason you have to schedule your lunch and dinner breaks ahead of time is because the polls have to be open continuously throughout the day, from 7 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night. You can't have a situation where all the poll workers take a lunch break or a dinner break at the same time, because then no one's manning the polls. And as a result, voters won't be processed, and that can't happen. What wardens are going to have to do is they're going to have to stagger lunch and dinner breaks to ensure that there are poll workers working at your polling location throughout the entire day. So again, if you want a lunch and dinner break, you need to talk to your warden ahead of time on the morning of the election so that you can schedule it out. Or you can call your warden earlier than that if you know their contact number. But again, for lunches and dinner breaks, you have to schedule your time out ahead of time so that the warden can stagger them, so that there's enough poll workers working at the polling location at all times. So now that we've sort of gone over the opening procedures for the morning, let's go over how to set up the polling machines. So the city uses two voting machines. The AccuVote voting machine, and this is the primary machine we use to process the ballots throughout the day, and the AutoMark machine, which is used to assist disabled, handicapped voters or voters for whom English is a second language with the marking of their ballot. So let's go over the AccuVote machine first. So your AccuVote machine will arrive at your polling location in this black bag. And the AccuVote machine will be inside along with a power cord and an ender card. Don't worry about the ender card until the end of the election. For now, let's just open up this bag and take a look at the voting machine. This is what the AccuVote voting machine looks like. This is going to be your primary machine that you're going to use throughout the day to process the ballots. So let's take a look at it. If you look at the top of the voting machine, we're going to notice three things. One, you're going to see a computer screen right here. This displays messages for the AccuVote machine that you may see throughout the day. And we'll go over some of the more typical messages that you're going to see from this screen throughout the day and what to do when you see them. Over here, this is your primary entry tray. So, when you're processing ballots, you're going to insert the ballots through this slot. These ballots will then be read by the machine, counted, and then deposited in the ballot box that this is attached to. Right here, you're going to see a protective cover with a lock. This protective cover covers the AccuVote's ticker tape. What the ticker tape is it's a paper and an ink cartridge that prints out the results of the election. So this provides a paper record of the amount of ballots that are processed by this AccuVote machine by your ward and precinct throughout Election Day. If we look at the front of the machine, you're going to notice two buttons here in the front. One of them is marked yes, and the other is marked no. These two buttons allow you to interact with the messages that may appear on this screen right here. Right here, this contains the AccuVote machine's memory card that is programmed for the election on the day. Do not touch this memory card or touch the protective metal bar that protects it. This memory card is removed from the voting machine at the end of the election when these machines return to City Hall. So you do not need to worry about this memory card at all. Leave it in the machine, don't touch it. On the side of the machine, you're going to notice two grooves right here. These grooves correspond with the ballot box and allows the poll workers to slide this machine in when they're setting it up in the morning. And finally, let's look at the back of the machine. If we look at the back of the machine, you're going to see this red button right here. This red button is the power button for the machine. This is how you turn the machine on. This prong right here is where you plug in the power cord. And finally, here is the exit slot, where the ballots come out of when they're deposited in the ballot box. So, we now have our AccuVote machine. But where does the AccuVote machine go? Well, on the morning of the election day, the wardens and clerks are going to be installing and setting up the AccuVote machine to go into this ballot box. This ballot box is what's used to store and process our ballots that are received at our polling location throughout the day. Each polling location, ward and precinct, is assigned one set of keys. The warden and clerk will use this set of keys to set up the AccuVote and the AutoMark machines in the presence of the police officer assigned to your polling location. Once the warden and clerk are finished using these keys, they then give the keys to the police officer, who maintains control of the keys throughout the day. If the warden and clerk will need these keys throughout the day, they need to call the police officer over so they can get the keys. And the police officer observes and watches the setup, the closing, and every time the polls need to be opened. This provides a layer of protection for poll workers and for the police officer, so that everyone is watching everything together and making sure that everything is being kept according to procedures. So, warden and clerks, it's the morning before the polls open, and you need to set up your AccuVote machine. How do we do it? Well, if we take a look at our set of keys, you're going to notice that one of the keys has a plastic ring around it. It can be of various colors, but you'll notice a plastic ring around it. This is the key that is used to open up all of the locks on this ballot box. So let's open up the locks one by one, see what each does, and how you set up your AccuVote machine to accept ballots in the morning. So, taking the key with the plastic ring, let us open up the first lock in the front, right here. So, taking the flat edge of the key, insert, and gently open. We have just opened up the security flap to this ballot box. This is what is used to hold the AccuVote voting machine in place in this ballot box throughout Election Day. So in order to set up the AccuVote machine, we have to keep this open for now. So keep this open. The next thing wardens and clerks are going to need to do is check to make sure that this ballot box is completely empty before we set up the AccuVote machine. We need to make sure that there's nothing in this ballot box so that it's zero and ready to go. So how do we do that? Take a look at the lock below the first lock we just opened. Insert the key, unlock like so, and voila. This lifts up the top of the ballot box. This allows the warden and the clerk to check inside and make sure that there's nothing inside. Let's tilt this, and hopefully you can see this in the video. Let me tilt this so you can see what the inside looks like. If you look inside the ballot box, you're going to notice that there are two main spaces in this box. You've got this smaller space right here on the side, and you have this larger space right here in the middle. And in this middle spot right here, this larger space, you're also going to notice the small plastic divider that divides that space into two. This main space is where all of the ballots are going to go into that are processed from the AccuVote machine. And this side space is where your hand count ballots are going to go into. But we'll get into hand count in a couple of minutes. So the warden and clerk will open up this ballot box and look through it. Make sure that there's nothing inside. No ballots, nothing. We've checked this ballot box and it's completely empty. So, having made sure it's empty, we close the top, and taking our key, we're going to resecure the top of the box. And you shouldn't have to open it for the rest of the election. So now, the warden and clerk will then move the ballot box to the side. And here, we're going to look at the hand count section. So, on election day, you should try to process all of your ballots through the AccuVote machine. But you may occasionally run into a ballot that, for whatever reason, isn't being read by the machine or can't be read by the machine. For those ballots, you're going to have to hand count them at the end of the night. So if the ballots aren't going to the machine, you're going to insert them into the hand count slot and place them into the hand count storage area so that they'll be secure until the end of the night. So to set up your hand count slot, take your key and open up the top of the locks right here. This opens up the hand count slot. So again, if a ballot doesn't go through the AccuVote machine, you're going to take that ballot and you're going to feed it into that slot. On this side, you're also going to notice another lock on the bottom. If we open up the bottom here, this opens up the compartment where your hand count ballots are going to be stored. So this is how you access those ballots, either at the end of the night or during the day if you have so many ballots that you need to store them until the end of the election. But we'll get into those procedures later on in this training. So again, the warden and clerk double check, make sure there's nothing inside, and once they make sure that everything's all set, they close this bottom door and relock it so that it's secure. But they leave this slot open for the rest of the election, because again, this is where your hand count ballots are going to go. And finally, the warden and clerk will check the rear. So hopefully you'll be able to see this. Let me lift this up a bit. If you look at the bottom of this box at the back, you'll see this lock right here. If we open this lock and we open this door, you'll see that this door opens up to that main area, that main compartment in the box. And the space is divided between two. On your left side, this will accept regular ballots. And on the right side, it'll sort into write-in ballots. So what this means is that when a voter is voting on election day on their ballot, they can vote for any of the named candidates, but if they wish, they can also write in a candidate that they wish to vote for. For those ballots that contain write-in signatures, the machine will try to divide it so that those ballots go into the write-in slot here in the main compartment. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So we'll discuss end-of-night procedures as this training goes on and discuss how you sort and count those write-in ballots at the end of the night. But in any event, this compartment here, again, contains all the ballots that the machine is going to process throughout the night and the day. So again, the warden and clerk check that compartment, make sure that it's empty, and once they check it, they lock it and resecure it so it's ready to go. So, now that we've checked this ballot box and make sure that it's empty and we've got everything set up, it's time to set up our AccuVote machine. So the warden and clerk will take the AccuVote machine out of the bag and they're going to slide it into this slot right here, the top slot. But don't slide it in all the way. There are two reasons for that. The first reason is that you've got to connect the power first before you turn the machine on. So going into our black bag, we pull out the power cord to the AccuVote machine. And what we do is, using the corresponding prong, we install the prong into the AccuVote machine in the back, and then we take the other end of the power cord and we're going to snake that power cord through this tube that you see in the back of the AccuVote machine. This allows you to snake the power cord through and plug it in to an outlet or extension cord prior to pushing the AccuVote machine all the way in. So we plugged in our power cord into the back, snaked out the power cord and plugged it in to an extension cord or a wall outlet. Now, before we turn on the machine, though, there's one more thing we have to do. This security shield up on the top, we've got to open it up. So, look at your key ring. You'll notice that there are two yellow keys here, one that's longer than the other. Take the shorter of the two yellow keys, head over to this lock, and unlock it. This removes the security shield, and it exposes a paper ticker tape right here. You can see it right here. I just lifted it out so you can see it. This ticker tape and printer, again, prints out a record of the election. So we remove the shield so that this ticker tape can print out and we can remove the ticker tape. So, wardens and clerks, you've plugged it in, you've got the power ready, you've removed the security shield. What you then do is you go to the rear and you turn on that red button. The moment you turn on that red button, the machine is going to boot up for a couple of minutes, and then it's going to immediately print out a ticker tape. That looks. Here's an example of a ticker tape from a previous election. So it prints out, you start here, ticket, 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 and here's your ticker tape. This ticker tape that just printed out is what's called the zero sheet. Prior to the election day, the election commissioners and the city calibrates all these machines and makes sure that, one, they're working properly, and two, that they are set to zero, which means that for every race that's going to be on the election, the machines are set to zero, and they're ready to essentially accept ballots. So this printer tape essentially is a record showing that all the races are set to zero. We need 3 copies of this ticker tape. So the moment this first ticker tape prints out, you're going to see a message. Print another one. Remember the yes and no button? Clerks and wardens, you're going to press yes. The moment you press yes, a second ticker tape is going to be printed out. An exact copy of this first ticker tape, the zero tape. You're going to rip that out. The message will display again. Print another one, hit yes. Your third and final ticker tape will print out, which you'll rip off. Once you have your 3 zero sheets, your 3 ticker tapes, and the message says again, print another one, just hit no. The moment you hit no, you are good to go. You are ready to accept ballots. So once that's set, you printed out your 3 ticker tapes and you hit no, you resecure your shield back on the voting machine, like so. You slide in your AccuVote machine all the way in, and then you take that secure flap, bring it up, push it in, and then using the key with that plastic ring, you're going to resecure it into the ballot box. Now, you may have to, don't force it if you're running into some resistance. You may have to push this in a bit more. So if you're running into major resistance, don't force it. You don't want to break your key inside the ballot box or something like that. Again, try to be gentle. Eventually it'll go in. And now, your AccuVote machine is ready to accept ballots for Election Day. So, now that we set up that machine, there is still one other machine that you have to set up, and that's the AutoMark system. The AutoMark machine will come in boxes that are like this. The machine is a bit heavy, so poll workers should assist one another in setting up the AccuVote machine. The AccuVote machine needs to be set up on a table that's waist high. The reason for that is that your poll workers and your handicap voters need to be able to access this AccuVote machine. And for handicap voters that use a wheelchair, you want this device to be at height to them so that they'll be able to use it. So I've set up an AutoMark machine right here, and we can go over setup. Inside that box, you're going to see the AccuVote machine, a book, which is an assistance book in English, Spanish, and Khmer for voters that wish to use it, a set of headphones that can be plugged into the audio jack of the AutoMark machine, and a power cord. To set this up, you set it up at a waist-length table. and you see these two prongs on the top of the machine. Slide those prongs to the side, and then you'll be able to lift up this flap right here. Once you lift this flap up, you can take the screen and gently move it out like so. This is the computer screen that the voter can use to mark any ballot that's inserted into here for the state primary. You then will take the flap that you just opened up and put it down like so. And then finally, you're going to go into the front and lift out and put down the feeder. This allows a voter to insert the ballot into the feeder so that the ballot will then appear on the screen and then can be marked using the touch screen. To turn on your AutoMark machine, once you've plugged it in, you're then going to go to your set of keys again, and you're going to take the longer of the two yellow keys, this one. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to the left-hand corner where you're going to see, again, a lock. This lock has three settings: off, on, and test. Inserting the key, you're going to move it to on. And I just turned it on with the battery, so I'm just going to shut it off. But that's how you turn the machine on. After a couple of minutes, the machine is going to boot up, and you should see a white main menu screen. That means that the AutoMark machine is ready to accept ballots for marking. Again, it's important that your AutoMark machine be set up at your polling location. Each polling location has one, and they have to be set up so that voters who are disabled or require assistance in marking their ballot can use this machine. It can be used to magnify the ballot for those for whom are visually impaired. It has Braille on it so that blind or visually impaired voters can use it to assist in the marking of the ballot. It also has recordings of the ballot in Spanish and Khmer, audio recordings, that you can listen to if you plug into the audio jack. So if you don't have a translator, this device can be used as a backup for those voters for whom English is a second language and their primary language is Spanish or Khmer. So again, you need to make sure that your AutoMark is set up along with your AccuVote machine before the election starts. So let's say you've checked everything, you've made sure, wardens and clerks, that your machines are set up. Once your machines are set up, you will take your keys and hand them off to the police officer. You are then going to take your zero sheets, and the warden and clerk need to sign the bottom of each of the three ticker tapes. And then one of these ticker tapes need to be posted at the entrance to your polling location. The reason for this is that this provides a record to all voters showing that these machines are all set, they're set to go, and they're set to zero, so that they're ready to accept ballots. So once you've posted your ticker tape, you've set up your machines, and everything else is set up, you are ready to open the polls at 7 o'clock. So let's say you've opened the polls at 7 o'clock and you're starting to accept voters. How does a voter vote on election day? Well, the way I like to train it is I like to refer to the way a voter typically votes as the voting cycle. And the reason I teach it this way is if poll workers understand how a typical voter votes, when something unusual happens in the cycle, they'll know that something has occurred, and they'll know that they need to call their warden and clerk over, and that they may have to do a special procedure in order to deal with the situation. So let's go over how a voter typically votes in the voting cycle. Let's say I'm a voter, and I'm coming to your ward or precinct. The first thing that I, the voter, should do, and will do, is I'll go to the check-in table at your polling location. So the check-in table, again, is a table at the opening of the polls that contains the check-in and check-out, the check-in books that voters have to check in with before they get a ballot. There will be two inspectors at the check-in table. The voter comes into the check-in table and says out loud their name and address. Hi, my name's Elliot Veloso. I live at 5 Liberty Lane. I'd like to vote. Once the voter provides their name and address, the inspectors will look into their check-in and check-out books. And again, there's going to be one check-in and check-out book. There's going to be two check-in books at your opening table. So one part 1 and one part 2, and we try to divide the addresses up alphabetically. So the inspectors at the check-in table, once the voter gives their name and address, are going to look into the book and, using a ruler we provide in the kit, go to the voter's address, and then using the ruler they're going to scroll down until they find the voter's name. Once they find the voter's name, the poll worker will then repeat out loud the voter's name and address. Okay, so you are Elliot Veloso and you're at 5 Liberty Lane. And once the voter confirms it, taking a red pencil that's going to be in your kit, you're going to go to the name and you're going to check off that voter with the red pencil. Here, let me zoom up a bit and you can see what it looks like. So in this instance, we found this voter by their address, we scrolled down, and then with a red pencil, we marked it to check in that voter at the polling location. Once the voter is checked in, the voter is then provided with a ballot. This ballot is then provided to the voter, and the voter then goes and marks their ballot in the poll booth. And then, after the voter marks the ballot, they then proceed to the checkout table. And in the checkout table, they have an exact copy of the check-in books that the inspectors at the check-in table just did. So at the checkout table, the same procedure applies. Voter provides their name and address. The inspectors at the checkout table scroll down to the address in the book, and they find the voter's name. They say the voter's name and address out loud, and once the voter confirms it, they again, with the red pencil, check that voter out. The voter then goes to the ballot box right here, inserts their ballot, and the ballot is counted and processed, and you're ready to go for the end of the day. So, that essentially is the voting cycle. That is how a typical voter will vote on election day. Now, the reason I bring this up is because there are going to be two major differences in this election, the September primary. One of them being caused by the fact that this is a state primary and not a general election, and the other due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's go over those changes right now. So the first difference in our election is because it's a state primary. So as a result, there are 4 ballots that are on the election for the state primary. So there are 4 political parties that are fielding candidates that people can vote for, and those are Democrat, Republican, Green Rainbow, and Libertarian. Now these ballots are color-coded. So Democrat is red, Republican is blue, Green Rainbow is green, and Libertarian is purple. If a voter is listed in your check-in book as a member of a particular political party, they may only get the ballot of that political party. So for instance, a Democrat can only get a Democratic ballot, or a Republican can only get a Republican ballot. If they're a member of a political party, they cannot get a ballot of any other party. So how can you tell if a voter is a member of a political party? Well, let's go back to the check-in books. I pulled this check-in book from the presidential primary, which occurred in March. If you look at the book, you'll notice next to certain registered voters, you're going to see a letter listed in this column. If you see this letter, that means that the voter is a member of a political party. D stands for Democrat, R stands for Republican, G stands for Green Rainbow, L stands for Libertarian. Again, if you check in a voter and you see a letter right here in this column, that indicates that that voter is a member of the political party and may only receive a ballot of the political party they belong to. Now, you may run into situations where a voter is a member of a political party but wants another party's ballot. If they request it, you can't give it to them. You can only give them the ballot of the political party they belong to. If they insist that they want to vote for a particular candidate, you can remind the voter that the ballot has a write-in section. So if they wish, they can write in the candidate that they wish to vote for, even if it's a member of another political party. Please note that even if they write a name in for a candidate for another political party, it will not count for that candidate. Again, the only people who can vote for the particular party is either those members of that political party or independents. So again, a Democrat can't vote for a Republican candidate during a primary, even if they write in that candidate's name. Now, what about independents? If we look back in that check-in list, we'll notice that there are certain entries that are blank, that they don't have a letter there. That means that those registered voters are independents. They don't belong to any political party. They're unenrolled. For those voters, they may select one ballot of their choice, either Democratic, Republican, Green, or Libertarian. When they choose which ballot they want, when the inspector checks them in, they need to note in red pencil the ballot they chose. So let's look to this book. So for this voter, it was an independent, but he wanted a Democratic ballot. So when the inspector found them and checked them in red pencil, they also wrote next to it a D, indicating that that voter selected a Democratic ballot. So again, an independent voter can select one ballot of their choice. And when they select that ballot, you need to note in red pencil which ballot they choose. D for Democrat, R for Republican, G for Green Rainbow, L for Libertarian. Finally, the other thing you should note is that this election, this primary, has 3 different districts. And what I mean by that is that because state representatives are running, the city is divided into 16th Middlesex District, 17th Middlesex District, and 18th Middlesex District. So as a result, the ballots aren't interchangeable. So certain ballots have to go to certain wards and precincts. The only thing you need to worry about is whatever your ward and precinct is, look at the top corner of your ballot. Your ward should correspond with the ward indicated on that ballot. Otherwise, the machine won't accept the ballot. So we pre-sort these ballots before they're delivered to your polling location on election day. So this shouldn't be an issue, but it's always safe to just double check just to make sure that you've got the correct ballots before election day. If you don't, call us, wardens and clerks, call us immediately. We'll deliver the correct ballots to you. But again, we pre-sort them before election day, so this issue shouldn't come up. So other than that, those are the main changes that come in the voting cycle because we're in a primary. Now, other changes are going to occur because of COVID-19. Now, because of COVID-19, Massachusetts has passed special legislation allowing for certain changes in the voting procedure to ensure the safety of our poll workers and voters and to try to make processing easier. So the first change that is going to occur in the voting cycle due to COVID-19 is that we do not need to use checkout tables. This is a big change. Usually in previous elections, the way it would work in the voting cycle is that a voter had to go to the check-in table, get checked in, get their ballot, they mark their ballot, and before they deposit their ballot in the machine, they had to go to a checkout table and get checked out before they could insert their ballot. Because of the danger posed by multiple lines, the state has decided that municipalities can decide to opt out of the checkout table requirement. So all a voter needs to do is check in, mark their ballot, and then can insert it into the machine. The City of Lowell is adopting this procedure for the state primary. So what this means is that there won't be a checkout table. All voters need to do is when they arrive at their polling location, they're going to check in, the poll workers are going to check them in the check-in books, provide them a ballot, the voter's going to go to the booth, mark their ballot, and then immediately go to the ballot machine to process their ballot. A poll worker is going to be assigned at the ballot box to make sure that voters are coming straight here to this location to process their ballot and are not leaving. So that's the first major change in the voting cycle due to COVID. The second major change is PPE equipment. The Secretary of State's office is providing each ward and precinct with personal protective equipment. So the state will be providing masks, gloves, 3 packages of hand sanitizing wipes, and bottles of hand sanitizer, 1 for each poll worker. Additionally, the kits will include a large bottle of hand sanitizer that voters can use, and the state will be providing plexiglass partitions that can be set up at each polling location at the check-in tables. The city is going to be supplementing these supplies with face shields that we're purchasing from W.B. Mason, as well as other supplies. So while poll workers are interacting with with voters, they need to wear their masks and their face shields at all times in order to protect them from voters. So obviously we understand that there may be situations where something may fall off or something like that, but at all times poll workers need to wear their face shield and their face mask when interacting with voters or in situations where they can't be more than 6 feet apart. This is a hard and fast rule, and we need all poll workers to maintain it because we want you to stay safe, okay? Secondly, we're also going to be asking that voters lining up to vote in person need to maintain 6 feet of distance while in line at the polls. Duct tape is going to be provided with your kits so that you can measure out 6 feet at the polling location. And we're going to try to pre-mark the lines with duct tape so that there can be a visual guide for voters that are going to be in line. Now obviously we can't duct tape the entire hall, but we're going to try to do it at least a few feet from the table so that we provide a visual guide to voters to know that they need to be 6 feet. Additionally, poll workers will need to go around from time to time to wipe down high contact areas with the sanitary wipes. So we ask that you wipe down ballot markers from time to time. You may need to wipe down this machine, the AccuVote machine, from time to time with the disinfectant wipes, as well as high traffic areas. So when you do this, poll workers should, again, wear their mask, their face shield, and wear gloves at all times. Either wear gloves or use the hand sanitizer at all times. Bathrooms at these polling locations are going to be open where available too for poll workers to use to wash hands. Okay. Finally, the other major change due to COVID is how to deal with voters that don't wear masks. Now, the city is strongly encouraging voters to wear masks. However, the guidance from the Secretary of State's office is that even if a voter comes in without a mask, we can't deny them the right to vote. So to deal with these maskless voters, what are we doing is that at each polling location, we're going to be setting up an isolation table. It's going to be one table in the far off corner that a voter that doesn't have a mask can use. If a maskless voter comes in and they either say or insist that they're not going to wear a mask, what the poll worker is going to do is they're going to check in that voter, give them the ballot of their choice, and then they're going to escort that voter, a maskless voter, to the isolation table in the corner of the polling location. They're then going to leave that voter alone in privacy so that voter can mark their ballot, and when the voter is done, the voter at the isolation table is going to raise their hand. The poll worker in full PPE gear again, remember, masks, face shields, and hand sanitizer or gloves, will then go to that voter and look at the polling location to look for an opportunity when the ballot box is clear of people or there's fewer people to allow for social distancing. The poll worker is then going to escort that maskless voter to the ballot box, where the maskless voter can then insert their ballot and for it to be counted. Now, if there are multiple maskless voters, they're going to have to wait socially distanced apart, one at a time, to use the isolation table. Now, obviously, if a maskless voter comes in with family members, we're not going to split families apart. We'll allow the family members to stay with that maskless family member who's voting. Additionally, if a maskless voter, either due to disability, needs to use the automark machine, obviously we're not going to refuse the voter that option. We'll just escort them to the automark machine. But for the most part, generally speaking, if a maskless voter comes into the polling location, we're allowing them to vote, but again, they're going to have to vote in the isolation table. Okay, so that way we keep poll workers safe, we keep other voters safe, and we keep that maskless voter safe. Okay, so those are the procedures that we're going to follow in response to COVID-19. Again, we're not using checkout tables, we're just using check-in tables, and we're going to maintain that isolation table. Okay, so having gone over those changes in the voting cycle, let me discuss the more traditional instances where the voting cycle may change. So these are common situations that you, the poll worker, may run into when you're processing ballots at the AccuVote machine. Whenever you run into one of these situations, inspectors call over your warden and clerk, because often they are going to be the ones that are going to be processing this voter. Always remember, keep calm, follow instructions, work the problem, and call City Hall if you run into any specific issues. Okay. Issue 1. Voter marks their ballot, comes to the voting machine, takes their ballot, inserts it, but the machine doesn't accept the ballot. So if you may run into situations where the ballot isn't going into the machine. In such situations, poll workers should do everything they can to get that ballot to be accepted by this machine. So, what can you do? The first thing you should look for is see if the ballot is bent. If the ballot is bent, taking the rulers that come in your kit, you can take the ballot and try to flatten it out. Try to straighten it out and see if the machine will accept it then. If the machine isn't accepting the ballot one way, try inserting it another way. If it doesn't accept it that way, try flipping it over and accepting it that way or the other way. The scanner on the machine is omnidirectional, so it will read the ballot no matter how you insert it. So again, if you insert the ballot one way and it doesn't accept it, try another way. Flip it, turn it over. If it's still not being accepted, you've checked to see if it was folded, you try to flatten it out. Check the ballot to see if the voter overvoted. Now, for the state primary, for all of these races, you can only vote for one candidate. So, it may be a situation, though, where the voter accidentally voted for 2. It can happen. Check your ballot. If the voter's ballot has extra votes on it, so a person accidentally voted for 2, let the voter know. Oh, I'm sorry, sir, if you look at the ballot, you accidentally voted, it looks like you voted for 2 candidates in this race. You can only vote for 1. 9 times out of 10, it's an accident. The voter looks, oh, geez, I thought I was voting for that race. I'm sorry about that. Can I get another ballot? That's fine. What you're going to do is you're going to take that ballot where they overvoted, and you're going to write spoil on it. And then you're going to take that ballot and you're going to put it in the spoil envelope in your kit. These are ballots that we're not counting because there were accidents or errors or something like that. So again, wardens and clerks, take the ballot that the person erroneously voted on and write spoil in black marker on it. You're then going to take that voter back to the check-in table, give them another ballot, and then they go back into the booth and correctly mark their ballot, and then they're going to insert it in the machine. You may run, and I'll be honest, I've never run into this scenario before, but you may run into a situation where a voter comes up, they've overvoted in a race, you pointed out, oh, you overvoted. I know, I want to vote for 2 people in this race. You can't vote for 2 people. The ballot says you can only vote for 1. I know, it's a matter of principle or whatever nonsense, I'm voting for 2. If you do everything in your power, but the voter insists that they want to overvote for that race, there is a procedure where you can override the machine so that the ballot will be accepted. So wardens and clerks, call your police officer over, take the key, open it up, and expose the buttons here. Hold and press yes and no together, and then insert the ballot. The ballot will then be fed into the machine and read. Now, for races that are overvoted, even if you insert the ballot in an override, any race that has an overvote is not going to be counted. So, the person is essentially wasting their vote in that race. So again, I've never run into this scenario before, but if you do, know that you can override the ballot in races where there's an overvote, but again, the overvote isn't going to be counted. Once you're done, resecure the machine, give the keys back to the police officer. So again, 9 times out of 10, it's just an error. So when you run into an error, spoil the ballot, give them a new ballot, and then process it that way. You may also run into a situation where occasionally you might have a ballot that has a printer error. If it inserts and it says error, you follow the same procedure as you would if a person overvoted. Spoil that ballot, give them a new ballot, and let them mark that, and then process it through the machine. Okay, let's say you do everything in your power, though, but for whatever reason, the ballot still isn't going through the machine. In those situations, you're going to have to insert that ballot into the hand count slot, because that ballot's going to have to be hand counted at the end of the night. If the machine can't read it and accept it, it's not counting that ballot. So again, you're going to have to take that ballot and insert it into the side hand count slot. Now remember, hand count should always be your last resort. Again, try to do everything you can to get the machine to count this ballot. The reason for that is because when the polls close, all poll workers are going to have to hand count, tally, and record all of the hand count ballots in the ballot box. The fewer hand counts you got to deal with, the fewer are going to have to be processed at the end of the night. So it'll make closeout easier for you. So again, try to do everything you can so that the machine will, ballot will be accepted by the machine. If you are running into situations where the machine keeps rejecting every ballot that's coming in, call City Hall immediately. Something is going wrong. Again, you shouldn't have to insert every ballot as a hand count. So again, wardens and clerks and inspectors, if the machine isn't accepting ballots, it's rejecting every ballot you try to put in, call City Hall immediately. We'll send a technician out there because something is wrong with the machine. All right? Again, hand count should be the count of last resort. Next scenario. Let's say a voter comes up to your check-in table and you're checking in the voter, but you notice for that voter you see an I underneath the box. Let me use this for an example. Let's use something from the presidential primary. So let's say you find a voter, but you notice this I underneath the box. The I stands for inactive voter. These are voters who registered to vote, but for whatever reason, they either haven't voted in a long time or they haven't responded to the local census. As such, we don't know if their address is current or not. Inactive voters will be required to fill out with the warden and clerk an affirmation of current and continuous residence sheet. And the sheet, again, is located in the green binder. Again, we consolidate all of the documentation that you may need to fill out on election day in the green binder so that you don't have to search around in the materials to find it. We did this in previous elections. A lot of clerks and wardens liked it. We're following that practice again for these upcoming elections. So, inspectors, if you run into a voter that has an I underneath their name, they're going to need to check in with the warden and clerk. And the warden and clerk will go into the materials, and they're going to find this affirmation of current and continuous residence, which they're going to fill out with the voter. So the warden and clerk will provide the ward, the precinct, the voter's name, their street number and address, their current address, and whether or not they provide ID. For inactive voters, they need to provide ID in order to go through this process. So again, Massachusetts is not an ID state. So when voters check in, all they need to do is provide their name and address. You don't ask them for ID. They don't need to provide it. It's only in these situations where a voter is inactive that ID will be asked for by the warden and clerk because we need to confirm that they're still living where they say they are. So, what forms of ID are acceptable? Acceptable identification must include the voter's name and the address where they are registered to vote. So acceptable forms of ID include a valid and current state-issued driver's license, state-issued ID card, a current utility bill, bank statement, recent paycheck, recent government check, or any other government document showing the voter's name and address. Passports don't count, so it has to be a state-issued form of ID like a driver's license. Now, what if the voter doesn't have ID? Even if an inactive voter fails to show ID, they must still be allowed to vote, and the ballot will be processed through the ballot machine just like any other ballot. But if a voter doesn't have ID, what the warden and clerk will do is that they're going to administer a challenge oath to that voter. And the challenge oath is conveniently located up the top right here in the affirmation of current and continuous residence log. So the clerk will read, okay, voter, Do you swear or affirm that you do currently and continuously live in the city of Lowell since the date listed on the inactive voters list or the date listed as a voter? The voter says yes. The voter signs. The warden signs the initials. They're given a ballot, and then they vote as normal. And again, if you need to do the oath is conveniently located right up top here on the list that you're filling out. So again, even if the inactive voter fails to show ID, so long as you administer the oath and they say, I do, they vote as normal. So again, once you do that, you check the voter in at the check-in book, you give them a ballot, they mark their ballot, and then they put it into the machine. Now, next scenario. Let's say a voter comes into your polling location. Let's use me as an example. I'm Elliot Veloso. I live at 5 Liberty Lane. I'd like to vote. The inspectors at the check-in table go into the check-in books, but when they look in the check-in books, they don't see the voter's name on the list. There may be times where the voter's name is not in the check-in book. In such situations, the inspector should call over the warden and clerk, and then all the poll workers should do the following. First, is the voter in the correct polling location? The first thing you as the poll worker should always do first is to check to see if the voter is a registered voter and is at their correct polling location. So the voter may not be registered to vote, or they may have not registered to vote in time for the election. So for the state primary, the last day in which you can register to vote for it is August 22nd. So you may have situations where a voter registered to vote, but they registered to vote later than August 22nd. As a result, they're not registered to vote for the state primary. They're registered to vote for all future elections, but not the state primary. To check a voter's registration, the voter themselves can check on the Secretary of State's website. If they type into Google Massachusetts Secretary of State voter registration search, or if you go to the website www.sec.state.ma.us/voter registration search, that'll pull up the voter registration website on the Secretary of State's website, and the voter themselves, or you, the poll worker, can look up that voter and see if they're registered to vote. Additionally, you can call City Hall. We're going to have a phone bank set up so that we can accept voter inquiry calls like that, and we can look you up in the state database to see if they're registered to vote. Now, the voter may be registered to vote, but they could also be in the wrong polling location. What we have is that we're going to have posters at our polling locations that have a QR code so that they can use their cell phone, click on it, and it'll take them to the Secretary of State's website where they can look up the location where they vote. They could also type in their cell phone, or you could type in your cell phone or laptop, wheredoivotema.com. That'll take you straight to the Secretary of State's website where you can look up your voter location. And again, you can also call City Hall. Just call our number, 978-674-4046. We can look up the voter in the system, see if they're registered to vote, and see where their polling location is. If the voter is in the wrong polling location, you need to do everything in your power to get that voter to the correct polling location. That's because the voter has to be checked in properly in order for their vote to be counted. So, if the voter is in, let's say, Ward 1, Precinct 2, and they need to be at Ward 3, Precinct 2, we'll provide you the directions as to where to go. If you need to look up a polling location where they need to go, call us, we'll find out. But once you know where they need to go, do everything in your power to try to convince that voter to go to the correct polling location, because they need to get checked in at the correct polling location. But what happens if the voter refuses to leave your polling location? He says, no, I know this is my incorrect polling location, but I'm going to vote here. Well, that's a scenario, among others, where you, the poll worker, may have to process this voter through what's known as provisional voting. Provisional voting is referred to as voting of last resort, and it involves rare circumstances where a voter does not appear in the check-in books, but may still be permitted to vote in a polling location. And the way I put it is that if a person is coming to vote, we don't turn voters away. But it isn't, we aren't clear with provisional voting whether this ballot is going to be counted. So here are some common scenarios where a voter may not be on the check-in list, but they're going to vote provisional anyway. So there was that scenario I just gave where the voter is in the incorrect polling location, but they're not leaving. Gosh darn it, they're going to vote here. It could also be a situation where a voter's name is not in the check-in list, but they absolutely insist that they're going to be in this polling location and that they want to vote here. It could be a scenario where the voter registered to vote late. So they're not registered to vote for this election, but they insist that they want to vote. So even though they're not on the list and they've registered late, you're going to allow them to vote via provisional ballot. It could be a situation where you've got a newly registered voter. They're registered to vote, but for whatever reason, when they registered to vote, they were flagged as needing to show ID because the information they put in their voter registration card didn't match up. So for those situations where on the list you'll see letters that says ID next to it and they don't have ID, in those situations where their name is either spelt incorrect or they provided an incorrect address or something like that, they're going to vote provisional. You may also have a situation where a voter comes to your polling location at the end of the night, they had a flat tire or they were caught in traffic and they want to vote, but they're at the incorrect polling location, and there's just not enough time for them to get to the correct polling location because it's across the city and the polls are closing. For those voters, we're going to let them vote provisional as well. So, in these situations, in order to process a provisional ballot, inspectors, call your wardens and clerks over because they're the ones who are going to be processing this voter. Wardens and clerks, in order to process a provisional ballot, you're going to pull out a pre-made provisional ballot kit. What we do is we pre-make these kits so that it's easy or easier for you to process a provisional voter. So let's take a look at this kit. This kit will contain a provisional ballot envelope, and stapled and attached to it, you're going to have a provisional ballot affirmation that the voter and the warden and clerk are going to fill out. So the voter is going to fill out all this information and sign and date it. And this information affirms or provides the reason why this voter is voting absentee. After the voter fills all this out and signs and dates it under pains and penalties of perjury, the election officials are then going to fill out this information right here. They're going to fill out whether the voter provided ID, the reason they're voting provisional, and the date and the time when they're doing this. And they'll also indicate what their research indicates. Is this a registered voter, registered too late, address change, etc. So once the voter fills out this affirmation, we then should ask and recommend that they also fill out this voter registration card that we've attached to the kit. So this way, the voter can register to vote or update their information if it was incorrect in the book. And that way, that information will be corrected and they won't have to vote provisional anymore. Once this application and the voter registration card are filled in, keep it stapled to this envelope. What the warden and clerk are going to do is they're then going to go into the green binder and they're going to go to the section where it has the provisional ballot tally. So there's going to be a provisional ballot tally sheet in here that the warden and clerk are then going to fill out too. And there's a section in the clerk's report that the clerk can fill out just showing the number of provisional ballots they got. Once the voter has filled out all the information and the warden and clerk have finished the processing, they're going to give this envelope along with the ballot that they're going to vote with. And the voter is going to take that ballot and this envelope to the booth in order to vote. Now, remember, keep all this documentation stapled to the envelope. Don't remove it, because that way we're going to keep it all together. So the voter takes their provisional ballot envelope with the documents stapled and their ballot to the booth. They mark the ballot, and then they're going to take that ballot and insert it, fold it and insert it into this envelope and seal it. Provisional ballots don't go into the AccuVote machine. They are not counted this way. The reason for that is because provisional ballots are reviewed at the end of the election by the election commissioner of the designees to determine whether or not they're going to accept these ballots or not. And most of the time, they're not going to accept these ballots because, again, the voter either didn't timely register or is in the wrong polling location, etc., etc. So Once the voter votes provisional, secures it in the envelope, they're going to return to the warden and clerk. The warden and clerk are then going to take that ballot and they're going to insert it in this orange provisional ballot bag. Again, provisional ballots do not go into the AccuVote machine. They go into that envelope and then they go into this orange provisional bag. Okay? And that's because at the end of the night, that orange bag is coming back to Lowell City Hall with the other materials so that the election commissioners can review it. Again, I can't stress this enough. Provisional ballots don't go into the machine. They go in the orange provisional bag. Okay, so the next scenario that you may run into, and you're likely going to run into it for these upcoming elections, are absentee and early voting ballots. So, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Massachusetts is expanding mail-in ballots to not only apply for absentee voters, but for all voters, regardless of reason. The reality is there's no real difference between absentee ballots being done by mail and early voting done by mail. Procedurally, it's the same way we process these ballots. I only call it that because it just keeps the difference together. For absentee ballots, you need to provide a reason why you're voting by absentee mail. For mail-in voting, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the state says for 2020 elections, everyone can vote by mail, just because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But for your concern as a poll worker, you don't need to worry about the difference because absentee ballots and early voting ballots are going to be processed the same way. The way it works is that prior to the election, voters will mail in or return their absentee or mail-in ballots to City Hall. They're then processed at City Hall and divided up by ward and precinct so that on election day, the election commissioners will deliver the absentee and early voting ballots to each ward and precinct. You can only accept absentee ballots provided by an election commissioner, not by the voter. So if a voter comes into your polling location and says, hey, here's my absentee ballot, you cannot accept it. Call City Hall immediately because the only absentee and early voting ballots you can accept are those that were provided or delivered to Lowell City Hall and processed. So again, the only absentee and early voting ballots that you can receive are those that are delivered to you by an election commissioner. Okay? Now, when you get these absentee ballots, you are going to treat these absentee ballots and these early voting ballots the same way you would if the voter was there in person. So what we do is, prior to the election, we take all of the check-in books and we mark them for every voter that has decided that we've received an absentee or early voting ballot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look through this presidential primary book and I'm going to find an entry where you can see how we mark these books. So for these voters, again, for those that we receive early voting or absentee voting ballots, you will see a mark on them showing that we received the ballot. So here's an example of an entry. So for this voter decided to vote early. So as a result, we mark the ballot with a blue mark that says early. So on election day, when you are processing all the early voting and absentee ballots that you are coming in, these ballots are going to be contained in an envelope that has the voter's signature, the date which they completed it, as well as their name and address where they're registered to vote. What you're going to do is you're going to take your check-in book, you're going to scroll down to find that voter, again, by their name and address like you would, and once you find the voter, you should see that that voter has a stamp showing that they're an absentee voter or an early voter. Here's an example of the absentee stamp. Once you find that voter, it's the same procedure. You check in that voter, showing that you've checked in that voter, you received their ballot, and then the poll workers are going to take that ballot out of the envelope once you've checked it in, and then you're going to process it through the voting machine, just as if the voter was appearing in person. So again, with absentee and early voting ballots, once you receive them from the election commissioner, you process them just like you would if the voter had appeared in person. You look to your check-in book, you find the voter's name, address and name, you find their entry, It should have a stamp showing that it's an absentee or early voting. You check them in, you take the ballot out of the envelope, and you process it through the machine like normal. Now, remember, you will receive your absentee and early voting ballots usually early in the morning. You should process these ballots when you can throughout the day. Do not wait until the close of polls. You have to process these ballots throughout the day because you might get so many of them. And you don't want to wait until the end of the day to process them because you might be dealing with hundreds of absentee or mail-in ballots. So again, you should process them throughout the day. Whenever you have a lull, get the absentee and early voting ballots, check them in, process them through the machine. Don't wait until the end of the day because that's just going to make your processing all the more difficult. Now, when a voter votes absentee or early voting, that should be their vote because they're stating that they're not going to be able to appear in person at the polls or for whatever reason they want to vote by mail. You may run into a rare scenario, though, where, for whatever reason, the absentee voter appears at the polls, even though they voted absentee. Let's say you've got a voter who comes in, he voted absentee, but then he shows up to the polls and says, yeah, I voted absentee because I was going to go on vacation, but COVID-19 sort of canceled my vacation plan, so I decided I'd vote in person, do my patriotic duty. So what do? Well, you can deal with that absentee voter one of two ways. If you haven't processed the absentee voter's ballot, his mail-in ballot, so you look into the books, you find that absentee voter's entry, but you didn't check him in, which means you didn't check in the ballot, you treat that voter as you would a normal voter. So what you do is you go into the absentee ballots that you received, you find that person's absentee ballot, and you spoil it. So you spoil the ballot, so it won't be counted. So write spoiled on the envelope, take the ballot out, write spoiled on the ballot, and put it back in and put it in the spoiled envelope. You then give that absentee voter who appeared in person their ballot and say, all right, here you go. We'll check you in. Here's your ballot. The voter goes to the booth, marks it, puts it in like normal. By spoiling their ballot, which hadn't been processed, we make sure that that voter doesn't vote twice. So, and clerks, note that as an unusual occurrence in your clerk's report, okay? So again, if you haven't processed the absentee ballot yet and the voter shows up, find that absentee ballot, spoil it so it won't be counted, give them a regular ballot, and that voter will vote. If the absentee ballot has already been processed, so you look the voter up in the book, and sure enough, he's already been checked in and the ballot has been processed, they can't vote again. So you'll go to the voter and say, I'm sorry, looking at the book, we've already processed your absentee ballot, you've already voted. Here's a sticker, have a good day. They can't vote again because you've already processed the ballot. So again, this scenario is rare. I don't think I've run into this situation before because again, the purpose of absentee and early voting is that you're voting then so you don't have to show up on election day. But again, if it does occur, that is the procedure you follow. So those are some of the most common scenarios that you're going to run into on election day. Before we go to the closing of the polls, let me go over a few common situations that you may run into on election day. The first involves observers. Because an election is a public event, various political parties or organizational groups or anything may have observers watching the polls. Observers are permitted to observe the polls during election day, but they are restricted by a code of behavior of activities that they can and can't do. Now, because of COVID-19, we're requiring that all observers need to wear masks when they can't be more than 6 feet away from a person or when they're in the polling area, okay? So observers have to wear masks. And what an observer can do is they can observe the check-in table and they can observe the ballot box. So they can look at the ballot box and see what the number of ballots processed is so far. What an observer cannot do is that they cannot interact with voters and with poll workers other than the warden. So they can't speak directly to voters, they can't speak with each other, they can't talk on their cell phones, they can't take photos or video of voters voting, they can't record audio, They can't converse with voters or election workers. They can't do any of that. All they can do is they can ask election officials to speak louder if, during the check-in table, the poll workers aren't repeating the voter's name and address out loud when it's given to them. But if they want to ask that, they should ask the warden. Again, they cannot talk to poll workers other than the warden. So, an observer, again, can only observe the check-in table and this ballot box processing. And they can only speak when making a challenge or making a request by speaking to the warden. For all other observers, any communication has to be made to the warden. Okay? Now, I mentioned challenge voters. What an observer can do is they can challenge a voter who they feel shouldn't be voting at that location. If a observer or anyone challenges a voter, you should immediately call over the warden and clerk, because they're going to have to go through the challenge procedure. So the way the challenge procedure works is, if a challenger says, I'm challenging this voter, the warden will ask the challenger, what is the reason for the challenge? The challenger then has to provide a specific and good faith reason why they're challenging this voter. They can't provide a generic reason, and they can't provide a inappropriate or improper reason to challenge a voter. So for instance, of improper challenges, let's say the warden says, well, why are you challenging this voter? And the challenger says, well, I'm challenging every fifth voter that comes in. I don't need a reason, I'm just challenging every fifth voter. That's a general and invalid reason. Or let's say a warden says, well, why are you challenging this voter? And the challenger says, well, I'm challenging this voter because he's black, and I don't think black people should vote. I mean, that's clearly an improper and racist reason why. So that's an improper challenge. Or they could ask, well, why are you challenging this voter? And the challenger says, well, she's a woman, and I don't think women should vote. Obviously, that's an improper and an improper reason to challenge someone. So those challenges are unacceptable. And if a challenger provides an unacceptable or an unspecific reason like that, the warden can reject it completely out of hand. The warden says, nope, that's an improper challenge, I'm not accepting that, voter is permitted to vote. If the challenger provides a specific and good faith reason, so challenger says, oh, I'm challenging this voter because I think I'm his next door neighbor, and he votes in Ward 6-1, not 5-1. All right, that's a specific good faith reason. So what the warden will then do is then they'll go to the challenged voter, and the challenged voter will say, okay, we're going to administer the oath again. So raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you are the identical person who you represent yourself to be, that you are registered in this precinct, and that you have not voted in this election? If the voter says yes, they're permitted to vote. Clerks, make a note of that in your clerk's report in the section for challenged voter. And what you're going to do on the ballot is you're going to give that voter, that challenged voter, a ballot. But in the colored section of the ballot, so that top one, in black marker, you're going to write CV and then a number. And the number is going to represent the number of challenged voters you received. Now, it's okay if you write in the colored section of your ballot. The machine is still going to read it and accept that ballot. But what that CV will indicate is that in the event of a recount, you'll be able to go through the ballots that were secured at the end of the election, and you're going to find that ballot that was challenged, CV, and then that ballot can be reviewed, okay? So again, once you administer the oath, and if the voter says I do, you give them a ballot, but you write CV in that colored area plus the number, and then you process the ballot as you would a normal ballot. You check the voter in, you give them the ballot with the CV and the number on it, they mark it in the booth, and then they put it into the ballot box. And in the check-in book, you should write CV in the book, next to their box, just so, again, you note it. Now, again, with invalid challenges, challengers cannot provide challenges that are not in good faith or specific. And a challenger that repeatedly makes challenges that are not in good faith or things like that is disrupting the election. So they can be ordered to leave the polling location. And they can even be subject to fines and imprisonment and other legal remedies. So again, baseless challenges are grounds for the warden to have the observer challenger removed from the voting location. So So if you run into a challenger that's continually making bad faith challenges, get your police officer over. Sir or ma'am, you're making bad faith challenges, you're disrupting this election, I'm asking you to leave. If they don't leave, have the officer escort them out. If they resist the officer will arrest that challenger. Again, the challenger cannot provide bad faith or improper challenges, and they cannot disrupt the election. Finally, let's deal with some other ancillary issues at the polling location. Campaign paraphernalia, buttons, hats, shirts. Can you wear them in a polling location? Well, if the candidate is on the ballot, you cannot wear campaign paraphernalia for that candidate on the ballot. So, if someone comes in with a hat or a button or something like that for a candidate on the ballot, you're going to have to ask them to remove that campaign paraphernalia. They can't wear it in the voting location. They can put it back on once they vote and once they leave, but they can't wear it inside. But remember, this only applies to candidates that are on the ballot. If someone comes in with, let's say, a Biden shirt or a Trump hat, well, they're not on the ballot for the state primary, so they can wear them inside. Additionally, voters can bring in voting aids to assist them with voting. You may have local organizations that have like a guide as to candidates, what their positions are and things like that. A voter can bring in voting aids to assist them and them alone. But what they can't do is leave that documentation at the polling location, and they can't give it to other voters. So if someone brings in a voting guide, they can bring it for themselves, but they can't hand it off to another voter. It can only be for themselves. Additionally, signs. You can have a sign at a polling location, but you can't bring it into a polling location. Signs or sign holders have to be 150 feet away from the entrance of the polling location, and they can't bring the sign inside. So again, someone can wave a sign in favor of a candidate or a position, but it's got to be 150 feet away from the polling location. And again, people should be wearing masks and social distancing. We are in the era of COVID. We have to be careful, okay? So, let's say you've gone through the day, you've processed everything, and now we're coming to 8 o'clock. It's time for the polls to close. So how do we close the polls? Well, polls close at 8 o'clock. But even if 8 o'clock comes and there are still voters in line, you have to process all the voters that are in line. We don't turn voters away just because it's 8 o'clock. So any voter that's still in line, when the polls close at 8, we process them through. Once every voter in line has been processed through, we then close out the polls. Now, the public can be permitted to watch and observe the closing of the polls, but only poll workers are permitted to deal with the actual process of counting and sealing and securing the ballots and the supplies for return back to City Hall. So, how do we close the polls? First thing we do is we need to shut down our AccuVote machine. So, it's 8 o'clock, polls are closed, we're ready to go. Wardens and clerks, call over your officer, because the officer is going to be observing this. Take out your key with a plastic ring, open up the front security flap, and open up your AccuVote machine. You're then going to take the smaller of the two yellow keys. You're going to open up the security flap to expose the ticker tape. And then, from your bag, you're going to remove from the AccuVote bag something called an ender card. The ender card should look like this. When you insert this ender card into the machine, it ends the election for the day. So remember, do not insert this into your machine until you are ready to close the election. So, once you are ready, take your ender card, insert it in, and once you insert that ender card, that ends your election. The machine will start automatically printing out a ticker tape for the end of the election. So, ticker, 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 ticker. Just like with the 0 ticker tapes in the beginning, you're going to need 3 copies of these. So the message will again appear. Print another one, hit yes. After you print out the second one, the message will appear. Print another one, hit yes. You print out your third and final one, print another one, hit no. That ends the election. You can then shut the machine off and remove the AccuVote from the machine. So we remove the well, first we'll reattach our security shield, unplug it, and we remove the machine from the ballot box. So, now that we've reviewed the AccuVote machine, we now have got to take out all of our ballots. So, First things first, we go to the rear of the machine, take out our keys, open up the rear hatch, and we take out all of our ballots. Now remember, the machine should hopefully have divided the ballots between those that have write-in names and those that don't. So remove all of your machine count ballots, and you're going to put them onto the side, into the corner. Okay? So, how do you know how many write-ins that you've got? Well, look to your ticker tape. If you examine your ticker tape, there's going to be an entry on your ticker tape that indicates the number of write-ins you received. Let's look at this old ticker tape. Do you see right here it says write-ins for a particular race? That symbolizes how many write-in ballots you should have received for that race. So as you go through your machine-counted ballots, you're going to separate those that had write-in names. And once you do, you're going to have to record those write-in names. So let's go to the green binder, and the clerks are going to pull out the tally sheets for the end of the night. I'm going to show you what a write-in tally sheet looks like in the previous election. See, it looks something like this. So what you're going to do is you're going to go through all of those ballots that have write-in names, and you're going to write in each write-in name, and you're going to mark how many times that name appears on the ballots. Now, every election you're going to run into a few jokers that want to put in a couple of silly names, like, oh, I'm voting for Mickey Mouse for this race, or Donald Duck. Even if they're silly names, at this stage in the game, write down every name you see. Okay, so even if it's Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or Ronald Reagan or George Washington, write the name down and check them in. Okay? The reason for that is you need to track and double check these names at the end of the night. And even at the end of the election, if there's a recount, we can look at those check-in sheets and see each write-in candidate's name. So again, if you look through that ticker tape, the number of write-ins you have should correspond with the number listed here in the machine count. If it doesn't, don't change the data. Don't alter anything to try to make it line up. Just note the discrepancy, okay? So, we go through all the machine count and we tally up all the write-in names. Once we do that, we now have to go through the hand count. So, organize your machine count ballots, divide them up between those that have write-ins and those that don't, put them aside. You're then going to open up the side of your ballot box, and you're going to remove all of the hand count ballots, like so. Once you remove all the hand count ballots, you're then going to have to hand count each ballot. So, you're going to go to your tally sheets and pull out the hand count. Here's an example from the presidential election. So for each hand count ballot, remember, because the machine didn't read them, you're going to have to track, and you're going to have to note what each hand count ballot voted for. So you'll go to each race, and you'll mark who they voted for each ballot for the hand count. And once you've hand counted all of the hand count ballots that you need to do, you're then ready to secure these ballots. Also, clerks, remember your clerk's report, because at the end of the report, you're going to have a section that shows closing out. And here you can see sections relative to total number of ballots for machine count, number of hand count, total number of ballots. Just follow the directions as you go through there. Now, let's say you finish counting all of your ballots. Once you finish counting all of your ballots, particularly your hand count, you need to add whatever additional hand count votes were given to various candidates on one of the ticker tapes, specifically the ticker tape you're going to post next to the zero sheet for the end of the night. The reason for that is that there are a lot of campaigns that have observers there watching to see what the final results are for your ward or precinct. So again, you need to announce out loud. So once you're done tallying and everything, okay everyone, here are the results for tonight's election. And then just go through the ticker tape. Okay, Kennedy got, let's say, 30 ballots plus 5 hand counts. Kennedy got 35 ballots plus 7 hand counts, whatever it is. Just go through the list, and then once you're done, you're going to take that ticker tape and you're going to post it on the wall. Again, the warden and clerk have to sign it, all three, just like they did with the 0 ticker tape. Once you've done all that, you're ready to secure these ballots in the ballot box for delivery back to Lowell City Hall. For this election, we are using red bins to secure our ballots at the end of the night. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the ballots, you're going to divide them up, again, by machine count and hand count, by political party, and you're going to lay them down in the red box. And then additionally, you're going to secure in here any other ballots that were not used. So any ballots that you didn't use, unmarked ones, you're also going to put in this red bin. If you run out of space, we can provide you with additional bins. But obviously, you should do everything in your power to get all of your ballots to fit into your red bins, okay? Once you have done and placed all of your machine count, your hand count, and unmarked ballots in your bin, you are then going to close the flaps, and then using yellow security tabs provided, you're going to insert them in these holes and secure them, both sides, so that these ballots are secured and ready to go back to City Hall. Now, this is extremely important. The only thing that goes into these bins at the end of the night are your machine count ballots, your hand count ballots, and your unmarked ballots. That's it. Nothing else goes into that bin. Not your election supplies, not your clerk's report, not your provisional ballots, not your signs. Nothing else goes into this red bin except your marked ballots, your machine count ballots, your hand count ballots, and your unmarked ballots. This is extremely important because once you secure your ballots in here, you can't open up this bin again. We had a situation a couple of years ago where someone, for whatever reason, put the payroll into that bin and secured it with the ballots. And because under state law we couldn't open that bin for 2 years, they couldn't get paid because we didn't have access to their payroll. So again, I can't emphasize this enough. Nothing else can go into this bin and secure it at the end of the night other than your machine count ballots, your hand count ballots, and your unused ballots. That's it. Or in other words, this does not go into this. Everything else, your provisional ballots, your spoiled ballots, all of your supplies, all of your materials, your clerk's report, your payroll, everything goes back to City Hall in the supply bag. Okay? So again, I can't emphasize this enough. The only thing that goes in here are your machine count, your hand count, and your unmarked ballots. That's it. Everything else, your provisional ballots, your clerk's report, everything goes in this bag. Okay? So, once you finish tallying the results, posting everything, securing your ballots, and putting them in the bin, you're then going to pack up, clean up your polling location, and put everything so that the warden can bring back everything back to City Hall. So the way the procedure works is, the ballots, once they are finally counted and secured, the AccuVote machine, which is put in here, along with the power cord and the ender card, and the keys are going to be delivered back by the police officer assigned to the polling location. So the police officer brings all that back. The warden brings the clerk's report and the provisional ballots and everything else in the tote bag. So all the posters that you put on the wall, the provisional ballots, your clerk's report, everything else the warden brings back in this bag. The only thing that the police officer brings back is the ballots secured in the ballot bin, the AccuVote machine, and the set of keys. And again, in the green binder, we're going to include checklists so that if you're ever unsure as to what you're setting up or what you're bringing back, look through the checklist, and you'll be able to go through it. Finally, I want to make a note of something. Poll workers work together, and if poll workers have indicated that they are working the whole day, at the close of the polls, poll workers have to stick together to close out the procedures. I know it's the end of the day, everyone's tired, they want to get home. But inspectors and clerks need to close out this polling location. And inspectors, you need to help the wardens and clerks with closing the location, cleaning up and everything. If we work together, we're able to close out the polling location at a decent time and everyone can go home. Poll workers, if you leave without authorization, if you leave early or you don't help the warden and clerk close out the location at the end of the night, remember that the wardens and clerks are in charge of payroll. And if it's noted that you left early or you didn't assist them at the end of the night, it's going to be noted in the payroll and you may not get paid. Again, poll workers, we work as a team. If we work together and we work together hard, we'll be able to close out the election at a decent time when we all go home. Okay? I hope that's understood. So that essentially is the end of our training session, our video training session. Before I end, I just want to indicate if you have any questions, issues at a polling location, or need anything else, make sure you call the elections office. Our number is 978-674-4046. Again, that's 978-674-4046. And I want to thank all poll workers who have signed up to work these elections in September and November. These are challenging times, specifically and especially because of and in light of COVID-19. I know for many poll workers, this has been a challenging time, but I want to say on behalf of the City of Lowell and on behalf of the election office, I want to thank each and every one of you for being willing and able to step up and being able to work the polls as poll workers during this election year. You are the reason that democracy works in this country. It is because of the efforts of you that it allows the City of Lowell and it allows this country to be the effective democracy that it is. So again, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for being able to work these polls as a poll worker. So thanks again, and this concludes our training session video. Thank you again, and we'll see you at the polls.